Hi, everyone. I'm Michael Wayne, and this is Voices for the Future. I'm here.
I'm Anna Judith. Michael and I co-create Voices of the Future together with people who have important, inspiring things to say.
Yeah, and today we're with Stephen Post, who's in Stony Brook, or Stony Brook, New York. Is that right?
That is right, Michael. Yes.
Yeah, from you're sitting in your office at the medical school. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes, that
Yeah,
is correct.
great. So, yeah, so before we can begin the conversation, I'll read Stephen's bio, let you know a little more about him, and then we'll begin. So, Stephen Post, PhD, is a best-selling author of Why Good Things Happen to Good People, How to Live a Longer, Happier, Healthier Life by the Simple Act of Giving. And in 1995, Stephen wrote a book, The Moral Challenge of Alzheimer's Disease, that was designated by the British Medical Journal as a medical classic of the 20th century. And Stephen is among a handful of individuals awarded the Distinguished Service Award by the National Alzheimer's Association. In 2001, Stephen founded the Institute for Research on Unlimited Love, which researches and distributes knowledge on kindness, giving, and spirituality. He's a frequent contributor to major magazines and newspapers, including the Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, and Time Magazine, and has appeared on The Daily Show and other national TV programs. Stephen served as a co-chair of the United Nations Population Fund Conference on Spirituality and Global Transformation. And as I pointed out, he's in his office at Stony Brook University Medical School, where he's a professor in the Department of Preventive Medicine and the founder director of the Stony Brook Center for Medical Humanities, Compassionate Care, and Bioethics. And Dr. Post's latest book is God and Love on Route 80, which amazing name, and it's been endorsed by a very illustrious number of people, including Deepak Chopra, Larry Dossey, and the Dalai Lama. And it's a meditation on the meaning of life and the importance of spirituality. His websites are stephengpost.com and unlimitedloveinstitute.org. So welcome, Stephen. It's definitely an honor to be with you here. And so you've accomplished a lot, and you still have more ahead of you. And so before we look at your present and future, could you tell us a little bit about your educational background leading up to where you are? Because I know you've said you had the opportunity to study when you were working on your doctoral program with Joseph Campbell, which is quite a great honor to study at the feet of a master. So I'll turn it over to you.
Well, that's a long, detailed story, and I'm going to skip most of it. But I went to a boarding school in New Hampshire, St. Paul's, and I was very interested in spirituality and world religions. I went off to Reed College mainly because they had a poet there named Robert Bly, who I thought was very intense,
Oh,
and he was. Um, I came back east, and I was a dialysis technician for a year, putting people on dialysis machines, and learned that I could talk with them and listen attentively and keep them from voting with their feet, because if they voted with their feet, it meant they were dead. So that was important. And I did a couple of years of research in pediatric hermaphrodism at Cornell Weill. Went to Penn for a year in immunology, and then I quit it all. And I went to the U of Chicago Divinity School, and I enjoyed wonderful people there. Csikszentmihalyi was working on flow. Eliade was there with all the puffy hair coming out of his ears. Campbell was there just 1/4 a year. Wendy Doniger was there. It was a great place to study the religions of the world. And I had no intent of going back into the medical fields, but at my last year in Chicago, they found out that I had some scientific background, and they invited me to teach in the Pritzker School in a course on social issues in medicine. And then I just went from there to Ann Arbor, uh, to Fordham, to Case Western Med for 20 years. And I've been at Stony Brook for 13 years on the North Shore of Long Island.
Yeah, so
My
that
goodness, you don't look old enough to have done all that, but how fascinating.
Thank you.
Yeah, how fascinating that you have put together the mystic ethical.
Yes, all along Route 80, by the way, in
Hmm.
one way or another.
That's great.
Yeah,
That's if people ask me where I'm from and where I was educated, I really have to say Route 80. But that's a long story too.
yeah.
Yeah.
And we'll go into that in just a little bit because it's such a fascinating story. But yeah, so it's interesting that you, I don't know if you'd call it, straddle both two worlds. Here you are, teaching medical students, and you have a bit, yeah, and your own background in world religions and comparative religious ethics. That's something that I don't think most medical students get exposed to in medical school, and I think that makes a big impact on them. I'm speculating, but I, I wonder.
Well, I have an informal role as a spiritual counselor here because medical students and faculty show up at my door regularly, and I always am undistracted and attentive to them, and they know I'll listen to them, and they have all kinds of stresses and struggles with meaning and purpose in this healthcare system. So they really need some spiritual conversation, and I'm able to provide that with them. We do a lot of small group reflections across the whole institution, and the program that I run is called Medical Humanities Compassionate Care and Bioethics, and there's no way to shorten that, because if you're sensitive humanistically to the illness experience, it's going to elicit these virtues of empathy and attentive listening and humility. And that's going to help you interact with patients and their families, which I've been doing for the last full year, counseling families completely shocked by the fact that one of their loved ones is in the intensive care unit with COVID. So that's been my job.
Yeah, yeah. So Stephen, I'm wondering what a central theme is of your life.
Well, I have a quote that I really like, and it's been my favorite quote for many, many years. This is a bit of a throwback, but Eleanor Roosevelt, she said, the future belongs to those who believe in the beauty of their dreams. The word beauty is really important. The beauty of their dreams.
Indeed. That's right. And this, we're talking about voice culture. So the future is those who believe in their dreams. And I think that if we don't create a beautiful future, we're hosed. I mean, beauty is an unsung spiritual value, as important as truth and love and knowledge and wisdom,
Oh, beauty
divine.
is so central. Leonardo da Vinci just spent his whole life chasing beauty, and he's
Yeah.
probably my exemplar for that. But yeah, I believe in the beauty of our dreams. Not every dream is filled with beauty, and we have to be discerning. But dreams matter to me, and I've tried to stay on track. I've tried to stick with the dream I had when I was a kid. That's really formed a lot of my attitudes and my otherwise unpredictable behaviors.
Yeah. Yeah. So before we delve into your most recent book, God and Love on Route 80, which we'll spend most of the time talking about, the prior book you wrote or co-wrote, I believe, which was a bestseller, Why Good Things Happen to Good People, How to Live a Longer, Happier Life by the Simple Act of Giving. I'm wondering what motivated you to write that book.
I was at University of Chicago, and I just felt that I wanted to work on the theme of love because there were these wonderful people around me, and it was something that still needed a lot of work, and I wasn't satisfied with what people thought about love necessarily. So I was influenced by a psychiatrist named Harry Stax Sullivan. I never met him. He
Oh,
was
yeah.
dead before I got there, but he had a totally social theory of schizophrenia, that it was all due to dysfunctional relationships and environments and so forth.
Hmm.
And I really believed that. And he had a definition of love, which I clearly adopted early on. When the happiness and the security of another is as real, you could say meaningful, as real to you as your own, and maybe more, he added, you love that person. And that just works. It's simple English, but if you're looking over the crib of a baby, or you're having a cup of uh, a latte with an old friend who's had a hard time or a good time, or you're just, you know, uh, waiting to uh, talk with yet another COVID family, it really works. And there's still an I in the equation, right? Their happiness and security becomes as important to me as my own happiness and security, not necessarily more so,
Hmm.
but that's an important point. So there's no Greek, no Latin, nothing like that. It's just plain common sense. And Harry Stack Sullivan was a beautiful man who was the best psychiatrist in world history when it came to people with schizophrenia.
Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, I certainly remember studying him in graduate school. What do you find from your research happens to people when they are in the act of giving and being generous and caring about others?
Yes, so I put that idea of love as the hub of a wheel, and then there are all these different spokes. One of them is forgiveness.
Hmm.
So forgiveness is an expression of love. If someone needs forgiveness, if they're really feeling badly about themselves, if they for example, we had a woman in the NICU who felt that she was responsible for the death of an infant because of a mistake that she made. And we counseled her and worked with her, and things worked out. But at about the same time, there was a similar case in New York City, and a nurse actually killed herself because she had no way to. Self-forgiveness is very, very difficult.
Hmm.
So forgiveness is an acceptance of imperfection. And I have this statement that I use with a lot of the clinicians here when they're beating themselves up. I say, those who make no mistakes make nothing. And that's true. But there are other in Why Good Things Happen, there are 9 other main expressions of this love. Because people get a little uneasy with the word love. What are you talking about? Love of chocolate, designer jeans, So certainly compassion for those who are suffering. But not everybody is suffering, although you can argue about that, because a lot of people would say that underneath a veneer of happiness, we all have some anxiety that we're going to, in fact, lose whatever it is in life that brings us joy. That's what Kierkegaard thought when he wrote the concept of anxiety, which is where the idea of anxiety came from in psychiatry, not from a physician, but from a theologian.
Ah.
So and certainly, the Buddha would say that you've got to be very careful to be detached, because the things that you're attached to that bring you happiness will disappear. So for me, compassion is important. Um, just plain old helping activities, simple helping behaviors, simple expressions of kindness. I come into this building in the morning, and um, I just try to acknowledge people. I say hello. I have a gentle curiosity. It's not developed empathy. I don't want to listen. I don't have time to the whole story of their lives, but at least a gentle curiosity. How's it going? How's your son Willie or whatever? And just so that people know that someone's acknowledging their lives, and in fact the struggles of their lives, because we all have struggles at some level. But there are many, carefrontation is another expression of love in the book. And so M. Scott Peck, who wrote The Road Less Traveled, was a graduate of Case Western's medical school. And I was there for 20 years, and we were very close friends. I mean, I was there after he had graduated and gone on to a career, but we corresponded because of the Alumni Association. And I, in fact, have a whole packet of correspondence with Scotty Peck, who lived in Groton, Connecticut, by the way. And he and I both thought that the word confrontation was too confrontational, and it's not a good word for a future of nonviolent communication.
Yeah.
So we came up, I actually have this beautiful letter. We came up together by phone and then later in correspondence with this idea of carefrontation.
Yeah.
And that's what Aristotle meant when he said, there's like three kinds of friends for Aristotle. One are just the people you use, not really friendship, but the people you use. And then there are the people you hang out with, party with. You just have these sorts of casual relationships. But a true friend, a benevolent friend, is someone who is going to have the audacity to, in a caring way, help you kind of stay on track. Because when we waver, these are the kinds of people you want on your nonprofit board, people who have your confidence and the courage to tell you that, what, this isn't you. And that's what carefrontation is about. So there are a lot of things in there, but they're all about these expressions of love, and they're all quite different. But it makes it a lot easier for people to think, what, love really is a part of my life.
Yeah, an important part of our life. Yeah.
Yeah, I use mirth too. Mirth is one of the expressions of love. I really believe in that. I mean, I'm constantly, people are astonished. I have a certain immaturity, and I tell kids jokes all the time because the heavy Freudian stuff that uncovers some horrible repressed reality doesn't inspire anybody. It's usually derisive. So I just walk around and I say, on the escalators, and I'll ask students, so what did the Zen Buddhist say to the hot dog vendor? Make me one with everything. Or those kinds of things. What did the fish say when it swam into the wall? I was doing that recently. Damn. I'll stop here. But you can see that, because sometimes humor gets used so derisively, even within earshot of patients, and it can be very hurtful. So I want to teach everyone here this kind of more uplifting form of humor.
Yeah, I mean, as Norman Cousins proved in his life story and wrote about in his Anatomy of an Illness, humor heals.
It sure does. It relieves stress, and it also reframes people's perspective. So when you think about it, there's nothing like mirth and humor to turn somebody around. It's just automatic, it's instant, it's so powerful. And suddenly they're not thinking the way they were thinking, they're laughing, right? And that's a big stress buster, and it opens them up to novel perspectives and to kind of rethink their situation. So if they're holding some terrible grudge against somebody from 10 years ago, right? With humor, they can get free of that and they can open into a different space. So I believe in mirth, and I practice it.
Yeah, that's good.
And it opens the heart as well.
Yes, yes. It opens the heart and you can feel it, you can feel it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So since we're talking about love, and the word love is in your new book, and I said we want to talk about that. Let's see if I can hold your God in Love on Route 8. Oh, it comes out backwards, I think, maybe.
No, looks good.
But the hidden mystery of
Okay.
human connectedness. So I'd like to start out just first asking you what got you to write the book?
Well, Michael and Anadia, I'm in these heavy duty scientific environments. And most people are inhibited when it comes to talking about the very possibility of something that is non-material. The notion that there could be a metaphysic to take seriously that would be basically described as non-materialism. That mind, for example, doesn't just come from cells and tissue and brain. In fact, it's not epiphenomenal at all. In the beginning was the word, in the beginning was mind, and everything else could derive from mind. So I'm quite influenced by a lot of people. I once had the honor of having dinner with Larry Dossey and Sir John Templeton when Larry was doing his conferences on One Mind. This is in like 1991. And Sir John, of course, really loved that idea and supported those conferences. So I'm a one mind type person. In the beginning, one mind, and we all participate in it, but it explains a lot of creativity, a lot of premonition, a lot of inspiration in ways that are quite amazing. That Indian mathematician, the man who knew infinity, who just had no mathematical background, but he was praying on the ground in front of his goddess, and he would write, this is Ramakrishna, he would write down these formulas in the dirt, and then afterwards he'd come back and he'd put them in his notebook. If you go to Cambridge University, you will find in their main library, right in the center of the library, Ramakrishna's notebooks, and they're the basis of quantum physics. So this is a level of creativity that is not really coming from him, but that almost invaded him. And he used that metaphor. It invaded him. So it wasn't just his mind, it was his mind being opened to a larger consciousness.
Yeah. So your book is very profound, and so going back to the beginning, you were inspired to go on this trip by a recurring dream, right, about a blue angel.
Yes.
Who's giving you a message about healing. Is that correct?
That is correct. I was
Yeah.
I was an oddball up at St. Paul's. All the other, it was a boys' school. All the other guys, they were going to the hockey games. I didn't like hockey. I thought it was a combination of America's worst habits, wanton violence, and long meetings. So I just, I would be out walking on the pathways and, reading mystical stuff. And I had a wonderful mentor named Reverend Rod Wells. He was an Episcopal priest, but he knew a lot of really wonderful Buddhists. So I had this dream. I took his sacred studies class, and I had this dream one morning. I was kind of in the world of betwixt and between. I wasn't quite awake and I wasn't quite asleep. And I would see a road, and I knew it was heading to the west. Um, that was just intuitive. And it was covered with fog and mist, and I couldn't see very far. And as I walked down the road, I saw to the left a youth with stringy blonde hair about to jump off a ledge. It was otherwise very unclear. And then suddenly, the face, the feminine face of a blue angel, came into the dream. Uh, the fog lifted, and she said, "If you save him, you too shall live." And that was the end of the dream. And I had no idea what it meant. I mean, I believe that human beings are desperately seeking meaning. And so they go on crazy detours. They create meaning. And a lot of it's subjective. I acknowledge that, you know. So I had no idea if this was objective and meaningful or just the result of my having to work off too many demerits in the sun raking leaves, or having digested a really bad hot dog that gave me dyspepsia. I mean, it could be a lot of different things. And we talked about this in class, but then the dream recurred. And that was what really amazed me. The identical dream
For
recurred.
like a year, right?
For a year, recurred 6 times. And my buddies up there, like Ned Perkins, whose grandfather was Malcolm Perkins, who edited F. Scott Fitzgerald, and Charlie Scribner and all these people, I would talk about this dream in school, and people just let it go. They thought it was a little crazy, but they were very tolerant, and they were amused by it. And I even went to Yale. Rod Wells was a Yale Div School grad. He took me to Prospect Street in New Haven for the first time, and I was in a class on adolescent spirituality, and they asked me about the dream. Did it, are you okay? Did it make you do anything? I said, well, I read Emerson, and up there everybody thinks Emerson's beautiful, but I don't think anybody really believes Emerson's idea of the oversoul. But I said, for me, the oversoul is this consciousness, and that's all there is. There's nothing but the oversoul. And so they were kind of freaked out. And but it was okay. It went well. And then they said, so did you actually do anything as a result of the dream? And I said, well, I did something that I don't think any St. Paul's kid has ever done. I actually applied to Reed College in Portland, Oregon. And I did it just intuitively because the guy from Reed was on campus, and I thought, maybe I should go west. But I didn't think that seriously, but it was sort of there in me. So that's the dream story.
Yeah. And so that's what compelled you to go west, young man.
Well, there was a pull and a push. So that Rodwell's got me a job in the Bronx, which I love tutoring. I used to tutor the French Canadian kids in New Hampshire at the Melville School just across on Pleasant Street. And I love teaching. I've taught all my life. That's all I've done, And I just enjoy it. It's so meaningful to me. And so Rod got me this job that summer in the Bronx tutoring kids, and my parents heard about it and they thought it was too dangerous. So my parents and I had a pretty significant argument, a big argument, for a couple of days running, because my mom said it's too dangerous, you can't do it. And my dad kind of he sort of followed along with mom. He wasn't so strong, but she was. And finally she said, look, if you do that, I'm not going to help you cover Swarthmore, because I was supposed to go down to Philadelphia and go to college. And I thought about this and I said, okay, I won't take this job, but what am I going to do? And my dad, he was the president of W&J Sloan's furniture store on Fifth Avenue, right? It's like across from the old Scribner's bookstore. My dad said to me, I know what you can do. You can work in Bill DeBono's lampshade factory. Now, I knew Bill DeBono, a big cigar smoking guy, and he had a lampshade factory in Patchogue on the South Shore of Long Island. So I drove for 2 weeks my dad's secondhand gray Mercedes 190, which he only bought to look good going up to St. Paul's, FYI. And I was cutting cardboard between two very large Italian women, and they were very nice people. The place was full of smoke and sweat. And I just decided one Friday night, second week, I'm not going to do this anymore. So I got in the Mercedes and I drove out to West Hampton Beach, which is kind of a hangout out on Eastern Long Island. And I told my friends, Livy Sutro and some others, I had a gal friend actually who I liked a lot, but I said, you know, I'm going west. I'm going to follow the dream. They knew about the dream. I said, you know, I'm just going to do it. And because so the pull was the dream, but the push was stuff going on at home, you know.
Yeah.
Did you ever meet them in the ledge out west?
Well, I did. I mean, I drove the car, you know, through the Midtown Tunnel, up the FDR Drive, across the George Washington Bridge, and I saw a sign, which I'd not seen before because I hadn't driven out that way in the past, and it said Route 80 West. There was another sign that said 95 South, but that wasn't, the dream was west. So I was driving west, and I just drove through the night. I had like $50. I was, you know, didn't have a lot of gas by the end of this, but I decided in the middle of Pennsylvania about 5 in the morning, you know, I'm going to do a U-turn over the Midway, and I'm going to try to get home. Still had a little money, because I can save my reputation and go to Swarthmore. But then something happened, and it was basically, I think, a very mystical, alchemical moment, if you will. Somehow the generator in that car, it was a beat up car, it just completely broke, and there was no energy, there was no power, no light, and I was able to get over to the right shoulder. This is at the Lewisburg exit. And there it was. I mean, for miles and miles, nothing but cornfields. And so I took a piece of paper out of the glove compartment, and I did what any kid would do. You know, of course, I had my classical guitar, my copy of Siddhartha, and a few other things. And I wrote a note, which became a matter of folkloric legend in my family. I wrote it in pencil.
And what did the note say?
To the Pennsylvania State Police. Please return this car to Henry A.V. Post, 44 Davison Lane East, West Islip, New York, 516-669-5655, from his son, Stephen, who no longer works in the lampshade factory.
Yeah.
That was it. And then I was off. I got a ride in a truck, and, you know, some days later I was in San Francisco in my cousin George's apartment in the Mission District.
Yeah. And that dream had significance.
It was so I drew a really bad number in the draft, and I was actually planning just to spend the next couple of years living in the Mission District. I was playing Villalobos and Granados in Hispanic restaurants, and I was doing fine. I was making, you know, $100 a night. And George was a great guy. He was so I liked what I was doing, but I'd also joined the Nichiren Shosho Temple, which was down on the corner of Market and Chenery Street, where they chant Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, which is about oneness and mystery and mind and connectedness. And so when I drew this really bad number, I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to go to Vietnam. So I called the Reed College people and I said, look, I know I turned you down, but I really need a spot. And they creatively said, okay. So I'm in front of the temple with George, with a mentor I had named Gus and a bunch of other people. I was ready to leave. It was about 7 in the morning. And Gus, who was a leader in the temple, he gave me a gohonzo, which is a scroll with Buddhist symbols on it and some Japanese writing, like a heart with a line through it, which means literally no heart, you know. And they had explained these things to me quickly as I was on my way out. So I put this in my briefcase, in my backpack, and now I carry a briefcase in my backpack. And I took a bus. I had to change buses, but I got to Golden Gate Park, and I walked across the park, which is a pretty long walk. And I saw the entrance to the Golden Gate Bridge. You know, there's rocks, and you know, you can walk up a stair. And I just kept going across the bridge. I was on the left side. It was very foggy. I did not have much visibility. I couldn't see more than about 3 or 4 feet maybe in front of me. And I got sort of to the middle of the bridge, and then I heard a kind of scratching noise to my left, and I squinted and I looked, and there was a face that looked kind of like the face that I saw in my dream. And it was a young man with stringy blonde hair, and he was literally hanging out on the ledge. And I looked at him, and he noticed me. So I said, I truly hope you don't plan to jump. I said it quietly, peacefully. And then he just screamed at me. Things from Macbeth, life is empty nothingness and all of that. And I said, well, you know, it sounds a little more realistic coming from you out on the bridge than it did than it did in Memorial Hall at St. Paul's. So we started talking, and I explained to him everything that happened: the dream, the argument with my folks, leaving the car on Route 80, the whole story. And I said, look, I think I'm here for a reason. I can't swear to it, but I think I'm here for a reason. And he thought I was kind of crazy, but I said, look, you're the one out there on the ledge. And so I said, look, if you come on my side of the ledge, on the pedestrian side, I'm going to give you something that's going to change your life. It's going to give you luck forever. Because, you know, there's a certain element of Buddhism that has that side of it. And so he said, what's that? And I pulled out this gohonzo, and I unscrolled it, and I said, this will give you luck, but you have to come over here and I'll explain it to you, which he did. And I explained to him, you know, these are the symbols, as far as I can tell, about one mind, about connectedness, about universal oneness. And he was quite taken with it. He calmed down. And then I said, look, take this note. I wrote a note to my cousin, George Lamont. George Lamont was a very well-known guy in San Francisco at the time. And I said, dear George, this is Harry. Please let him sleep on your floor where I was sleeping. Take him to the temple, introduce him to Gus, and just take care of him. And George was no fool. I mean, he was a North Carolina Chapel Hill grad in psychology and Asian thought. And he was a wonderful, wonderful person. So he took care of him. And then I went up to Oregon. And as I walked north on the bridge, because Harry was walking south, suddenly all the fog lifted, and it was totally, almost immediately, bright blue. And I was astonished, because that really brought the dream back to my consciousness. And I thought, you know, this is really profound. I think there's such a beautiful experience that I'm being given here. And this is something that I'm going to take for the rest of my life. And I have. I never gave up on the beauty of that dream. And that's the, that's the beginning of my whole journey.
Hmm. So your book is really about synchronicities and universal mind. And it's very profound from dream to
Yeah.
reality. I mean, that's really synchronicity. So I'm wondering though, first let's unpeel those terms like universal mind. What does that mean to you?
Well, I think mind is the ultimate reality that underlies all that is. Uh, and I think that um, we, each of us, uh, have some small part of that mind, which we manage, if you will, during our lives on this earth. But that mind is not isolated. It's not cordoned off. It's part of a larger mind. And that's why I can take things like dreams seriously. I mean, it's amazing that I had that dream when I was 15, and when I was on the bridge, I was 17. So it was 2 years earlier, which meant that time may not be real.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And it was 3,000 miles away. Um, so time and space may not be real. So it just suggested to me that there's a kind of profound oneness beyond time and space, and that we can participate in that and be brought together, uh, even with a stranger,
Mhm.
because I never had met Harry before. It's not like, I mean, later on when my mother had some premonitions of me when I was in great danger, but mothers love their sons, at least they're supposed to. Depending on their sons, I suppose, and maybe depending on the mothers. But this is what Sheldrake calls uh, uh, love. Uh, what's his word for that? He has a wonderful expression which I'm forgetting right now. But that love somehow connects us across time and place in these remarkable ways. But again, I didn't know Harry from Adam. Um, Morphological forms, he calls them.
Yeah.
So yeah, um,
Amorphic resonance. Yeah.
morphic resonance. I mean, I had no morphic resonance with Harry that I could discern, but there I was.
And it sounds like he did as much for you as you did for him
You
by
know,
setting you on a path at 17.
yeah, he really did. And in my career, uh, I've had opportunities to help some other suicidal adolescents. I mean, when I was at Case Western, the psychiatrists at at the clinic used to call me in if they had a really, really difficult young person, adolescent or young adult. They just couldn't make any progress. And there was one young guy who was about 19. He tried to kill himself. He even swallowed some Drano, which is very damaging. And he was under 24/7 observation. And they called me over. I'm not a psychiatrist, but they called me over. And he had the selfish gene. He had Sartre's Being and Nothingness, The Look, and all these other books that basically said, he had The Lord of the Flies, all these books that said, look, if anybody has an ounce of kindness, don't believe them. They're just after your wallet or your pocketbook or whatever. They're just trying to use you. So he had lost his confidence in human nature. And I spent, several days with him, off and on. I had other things to do. And then they went down to Cincinnati. He took a year off. He came back, and he became a research associate for my Institute for Research on Unlimited Love. So, and I actually took him down to Lee Road in Cleveland Heights, where there was a Nam-myoho Renge temple, and I got him a Gajon zone.
Hmm.
Mm. So, what do you think it's going to take to bring this world to a paradigm of love?
Hmm.
I think it's happening a lot right now. I think people are attracted to radiance. And I think that when we encounter people who give and glow, they just have this effervescence about them. We automatically realize that love is the ultimate reality. So it's partly the people we encounter on our individual journeys, but I think there are more and more people who recognize that either we move in this direction or we really are, as Anna Diaz said earlier, not going to make it. So it's not as though there's a choice. So I think people see this and they're awakening to it. It's a process. But yeah, and also the other thing is that science is helpful. There's so many people with noetics and all that, who are looking at love seriously as the ultimate reality. I mean, what Paul Tillich called the ground of being. Ultimately, all these little particles flickering in and out of existence in less than a 15th of a second. So the world is so fluid, and suddenly it almost becomes plausible to think of this as an energetic field that takes on certain expressions. And if that's true, then what is that energy? Because it's obviously creative. It's obviously creative energy.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what, I think the Hindus meant with, their supreme being, that there was a being beyond time and place who was pure love, energy, and set the universe in motion. And that's in everything around us. So hence, I do believe in healing energy. Okay. I'm okay with that. And I think that within each of us, if we could just slow down and breathe deep and meditate and feel it, I actually think we have a bit of that infinite mind, or I call it the original mind sometimes, within us. And when we connect with it, then we are radiant. Now you can still, I meditate every morning and pray for, at least an hour from like 5 to 6. And I get to work early because I got so much stuff to do, but I'm still capable. This is a confession. I have to confess. If there's someone who slows down unnecessarily at the yellow light in front of me on the way to my office, I am capable of falling full chested on my horn and thinking an expletive. So I'm not perfect. Yeah, I still struggle, but I try to control that side of human nature. Rushing from point A to point B to point C. And that's all New York is, by the way. I mean, you go into New York during the rush hour, it's just like people zooming to get from point A to point B and walking over folks who are just lying on the streets. I mean, they're just so busy doing that they forget about being. And that's unfortunate.
Yeah. So the other part of the ideas in God and Love on Route 80 is what I mentioned before, synchronicity. We talked about universal mind. So synchronicity is, an idea Carl Jung first proposed it. And so where would you say then synchronicity fits on that spectrum, universal mind, love?
Well, I believe that synchronicity is the major way that this cherishing infinite mind connects with us. So suddenly, it's a story in God and Love on Route 80. My wife Mitsuko and I had moved from Ann Arbor, Michigan to Terrytown, New York, and I'd taken a job at Fordham for a few years before I went back out to Ohio in Case Western. And I had spent literally every penny I had to get an apartment in Terrytown because it was so much more expensive than Detroit. And I didn't like calling my parents and asking them for money. So Mitsuko and I meditated, and we said a little prayer in the car. It was a secondhand Nissan, by the way, in front of the Howard Johnson's Diner on the other side of what was then the Tappan Zee Bridge. And we prayed for $100. And then suddenly Mitsuko said, "You've got to get out of the car because something hit us." I said, "Mitsuko, I didn't feel anything." So I went out there, and this big, huge African-American guy in a white suit, looks like he was coming back from a Pentecostal meeting or something. He said, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Just take $100 bill." And that'll do it. And I said, "Fine." So he gave me a $100 bill. And I said, "Sir, you are an answer to a prayer."
Huh.
And we went into the Howard Johnson Diner with our then 2-year-old daughter, Emma. And that to me was a really great example of synchronicity, that somehow there's a presence in this universe that is very attentive to our needs, but we have to notice it. I mean, you have to be Larry Dossey has a term, you have to be a noticer. So there are winks and whispers, you have to notice it. And if you do, life, even though life is hard, I mean, I don't want to be Pollyannish, there are hard times in life, but if you notice these things and you kind of follow their rhythm, you can have a lot of joy.
Uh-huh. So to quote a famous philosopher, is it true that you can't always get what you want, but if you try sometime, you'll get what you need? That's Mick Jagger, by the way.
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure. I think that we need to dream what we can, but also be open to the fact that our goals are not necessarily our destiny. This cherishing mind, this is what the word calling refers to. It actually has a destiny in mind. Every human being, I fully believe, even though they may be humiliated and they may be told that they don't have any destiny, that they're nothing, that they're a cosmic mistake, I believe that every human being has a destiny, that they have a certain set of unique talents and they're destined, they're called in certain directions. And what happens is that our small goals get in the way of our opening ourselves up to that destiny. So that's kind of my rough reading of what you're saying. I'm not sure it's something that Mick would concur with, but I'm always trying to be careful because I know that my goals on every given day, which can become very picayune and just very mundane and very routinized and very much part of my work life, I have to be very careful not to let them overwhelm what I think is our spiritual destiny.
Mhm.
Takes a certain amount of surrender to go to that destiny also, right? A certain amount of allowing the divine mind to interfere and change your plans.
Yeah, very much. So, I spent 20 years in Shaker Heights, Ohio, and we raised our kids there, and it was a beautiful integrated neighborhood, and I loved it, and I never wanted to leave Cleveland. I loved Cleveland. I know some of your listeners can't believe that, but I love Cleveland. I still love it to this day. And some things happened politically and economically that kind of forced me to think seriously about another job. So I wound up getting this offer at Stony Brook Med, but I was so reluctant. And that night I was in University Circle near Severance Hall where the orchestra played with my friend Tom Frudig. It's about 11 at night, and my family's in the Glidden House Hotel, and I'm kind of despondent. And Tom says, "Well, it looks like you just have to do it now." And this guy, this African American guy, came out from behind a restaurant, late at night, and he had a stick, a beautiful carved stick, and he walked over to me, and he said, I had a dream, and I thought someone would be here, and I'm going to give you this stick, but it'll cost you $40. So Tom, who's still my friend, Tom lent me $40. I gave this guy $40, and I had this beautiful stick, which I still keep in my living room. And Tom said, this stick knows where you're going better than you do. And I was so distressed when I got here because I really felt I'd lost my home, I'd lost my community, all the attachments that you have that you are kind of subtle, the tones of voice that you're familiar with, the symbols in your environment, all of that stuff was kind of gone. And I struggled for a couple of years. But then what I realized as this unfolded here at Stony Brook, that somehow Victor Chan, who runs the Dalai Lama Center in Vancouver, he had me out there to do a talk. And I talked about this a little bit. And he said, in strict Buddhist terms, he said, you know what? You were too attached to Cleveland.
Huh.
That's what Victor said, And I thought about it. And I said, Victor, you're right. So, we all have attachments. We grow fond of our friends and our neighbors and all that. But somehow it was my destiny, not my goal, but it was my destiny in a painful sense to leave Cleveland and go on Route 80 east. And that night, we're in the Three Village Inn in Stony Brook along the North Shore. It's really full of mildew. It's raining like crazy. And my wife and my son, they realized that we were somehow no longer in Cleveland, and they just were screaming at me. It was the worst night of my life. So I did what any guy would do. I got in the car and I went down Route 25A to Little Tony's Pizzeria.
Stephen, we're getting close to the end of the hour, but we have a question coming in from one of our listeners. Are you willing to take that?
Yes, I will. Questions are better.
Any other
Judith
questions?
asked, how do you explain suffering in relation to your ideas of destiny? Good people whose prayers were not answered, e.g. the victims of the Holocaust, the parents of children who are starving in Yemen, et cetera, et cetera. The horrible things we know are going on in the world.
Right. So I never think in terms of theodicy, that somehow, that's a theological term, that somehow suffering undermines the credibility of a cherishing presence in the universe. Suffering just comes with the territory of embodied life. The Gnostics, they believe that we come into this world in part to suffer, and that's how we grow. That the whole point, and Sir John Templeton wrote a book about this, the whole point of life is growth. And if we didn't have suffering, we wouldn't grow. So I've known, I've worked a lot. I'm known very widely for my work in NICU care and in populations with cognitive developmental disabilities, and in the Alzheimer's community and the ALS community. So there's a lot of suffering that goes on. We all suffer. We may try to deflect our attention from that reality, but it is a reality. And in the end, it's, contrary to the American myth, it's not like individualism and independence. It's interdependence and vulnerability. That's the reality. And so suffering makes us realize how much we need each other, how connected we are. And it takes a lot of spiritual strength. Viktor Frankl, everyone knows, wrote Man's Search for Meaning. And he was in a death camp. And everybody around him was dying, but he found a way to transcend that by simply sharing his little morsels of food with people who looked more emaciated than others. And so he found meaning and purpose in that context. And I think that that's how life is. And the Gnostics, and by the way, Pythagoreans, Pythagoreans were Greek Gnostics. The reason they didn't believe in assisted suicide was because they thought it was an escape from a necessary suffering.
Hmm.
I'm not sure I agree with that. I don't necessarily agree with that at all. But the point is that suffering is a part of the territory, and you're not going to get away without it. And you know, a huge percentage of people will have progressive, intractable, dementing illnesses, and they will lose some of their cognition. They're still there, I believe. There is this sort of thing called paradoxical lucidity, where their presence is revealed, but it's painful to us. It's painful to them as they lose that lucidity and that sense of temporal glue between past and present and future. But they adjust, and we have to just understand that there's no suffering that is. I've suffered in lots of different ways. There's no suffering that we can't handle if we decide that it's an opportunity for growth.
Mm-hmm. You talked about studying with Eliade. One of the quotes I remember from him is he said, one of the great strengths of Christianity is it gives a moral value to suffering.
Yes, yeah. He thought that the uniqueness of Christianity was how it managed the reality of suffering, that suffering could be redemptive. Now, I'm not trying to get theological on people, but the idea that somehow there can always be some surprising element to our suffering. We have to be open to surprises. In my life, a lot of times, the most wonderful things have seemed to have happened in the wake of suffering. So this may sound childish and naive, but I think it's true.
Well, suffering can bring us to our knees and to an opening to grace and to an opening to that intelligence that is actually trying to bring us to a better relation or, a better way of being. And we have to open to grace in order to allow that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's so true. I agree completely.
Yeah, Pema Chodron talks about post-traumatic growth. The
Yes.
stress. Yeah.
Yeah.
So another question about your book, Stephen, is you've said that God and Love on Route 80, that is, you've said that it was to help people be liberated from the materialistic life sciences. So I'm wondering if you could say a little more about that.
Well, to use a Freudian term, ironically, they are disinhibited from their materialism by God and Love on Route 80. I don't hand that book out left and right in a medical school because there are a lot of people who would wonder about that.
Mm-hmm.
But if by elective affinity, people show up at my door here and they say, I really want a copy of this God and Love on Route 80 thing, I will give it to them. I will sign it. I got them in my shelf right here. And I'm wanting to talk with them about it. And a lot of folks find that very meaningful. And that's part of my role here. My role is to be sitting in this office and receptive to people who have experiences that are beyond material causality, at least as they understand it. And Jung's idea of synchronicity is, he talked about it as uncaused causality, capital U, capital C, a higher form of causality than material causality. But material causality is that's the name of the game here. I mean, everybody's got NIH grants, and they're pipetting chemicals. So I enjoyed having written this book because it freed them, but it also frees me. It frees me just to say, you know what, I was able to express this idea of the universe despite being in a totally scientific environment. But there's actually a lot of people with spirituality. It's not a faith-based institution. A lot of them are not church and so forth, but they have this hunger and this interest in spirituality, and the idea of one mind explains a lot of things to them that otherwise they can't talk about.
Yeah, great contribution. So if
What
anyone
discovering.
Oh, I was just going to say, if anyone has any questions, you put in the chat box or raise hand. And we'll go a little longer here as we're starting to wind down. Yeah, Anadea, you were going to say something?
The findings, your Institute for the Study of Divine Love. I'm fascinated. I want to know what you're coming up with.
Well, we wrote actually Matt Lee, Margaret, who was at Harvard, and Margaret Paloma and myself did a book with Oxford about 6 years ago, which was based on a national survey of about 1,200 adult Americans, totally random. And we asked them if they had experienced this divine presence. And 80% of them said they had, at least on one occasion, that somehow they had felt almost invaded by an energy, if you will, and that it had directed their attention in this way or that way. But half of that 80% said that usually when they experienced this love, it wasn't directly, it wasn't in a mystical sense, like suddenly they're looking around their, over their shoulder, where did that come from? It comes through other people. So it's synchronicity, that they were struggling with the problem and they were meditating about it and visualizing and praying and hoping and really vexed by this problem. And then the perfect person at the perfect time, in the perfect way, in the perfect place just shows up. And they felt that it was so uncanny. And then we asked them, so how often have you had these experiences? So about 40% of Americans have had these experiences, quote unquote, more than once. About 20% have had them 10 times or more, and about 10% have them regularly, and there's 5% who have them constantly. So they're just walking around with this kind of spiritual sensibility alive in them. And it makes them, they say, feel grateful for creation, for their world, for their life. Makes them feel joyful. It makes them feel resilient, better able to deal with loss and disappointment. So there are people every place who, despite the sort of heavy materialism that you sometimes think is the dominant motif, they may not be worshiping formally, but they have a deep presence within them, and they sense this amazing love energy in the universe around them and in nature. A lot of them find it in nature, in naturalistic settings.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. So we wrote a book about this that wasn't a bestseller. It was an academic book. It was a sociological study. But we even interviewed Auntie Annie, who, the pretzel gal, who's actually she's Amish, and she had a dream. Her husband was broke. They had no money to pay the bills, and she had a dream about these pretzels, and she put together the right uh, uh, formula, and Auntie Annie's uh, has been a success story, and she sold it for millions and millions of dollars, and she gave it to the Amish community to create homes for Amish people with behavioral difficulties.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
That's
Yeah.
powerful. Yeah. So we have a question from Lisa, shifting topic. She wonders, do you think there are any true victims?
Yes, I do. I mean, I do think that you have to care for the self, and I don't think anyone should subject themselves to wanton harm. Um, I certainly believe that we should be careful of abuse. Human love is very unstable. Uh, Sir John Templeton would say to me, "Don't just study human love. That's awfully arrogant." And in human love sometimes quickly becomes human hatred. He said, "Study the love that made humans," and there's a big difference there. So uh, nobody should allow themselves. It's like Martin Luther King said. Um, he had a premonition that he might get assassinated, but he said, um, I don't want to be assassinated, but I accept, because of my larger mission in life, the possibility that a bullet might find me. So there's a big difference between recognizing that there are certain kinds of dangers in our lives, things that we're called to, and actually, looking for those things to happen to us. That would be, to me, pathological, I would say. So I'm not into self um, um, immolation or self-harm. In any way, shape, or form, I don't think you should look for that. But on the other hand, if it comes your way with a Gandhi or a Martin Luther King or an Abraham Lincoln or Mrs. Bhutto, it may, in certain lives, it may find you, and you accept it. It's not that you don't love your life. It's not that you don't want to live on, but somehow this is your destiny. It's not necessarily your goal. It shouldn't be your goal, but it's your destiny.
Yeah. That's powerful and great, Stephen. And your book on synchronicities and the power of universal mind is just such a great inspiration for so many. That's wonderful. So, and I just want to hold up your book again, God and Love on Route 80, because it's such a powerful book, and your website, stephengpost.com, and Unlimited Love Institute.
Yes, yeah, unlimitedloveinstitute.org. Yeah.
Yeah.
Named by Sir John. I mean, he'd written a little book called Pure Unlimited Love, and he faxed me from Lightford Key, and he said, "Do you want to start an institute to study not just human love, but the love that made humans?" And I said, "Sure, what should we call it?" And he faxed back, the Institute for Research on Unlimited Love. And I faxed back, "Sir John, maybe we should be a little more prudent and call it the Institute for the Study of Creative Altruism." And he faxed back, "No, I think Unlimited Love, up to $8.9 million. And I faxed back, "Sir John, I love that language. It jumps right off the page." And he was right, because from the spiritual angle, altruism is a dry, sciencey, conformist word, but love is what we're really talking about, and that's what the world needs.
Yeah. Totally.
That's what the world needs.
Yeah.
And you are
Anadea.
bringing it, and you're bringing it with your stories, and you're bringing it with your healing, and you're bringing it into the medical world. And how wonderful that you've written this book, and that you've taken the time to talk with us and with our listeners, and many will benefit from that.
Yeah. Well,
Well, you
yeah.
are beautiful people. I mean, Anadia and Michael, I mean, I'm just thrilled to be on your program because you're very gifted and very special, and I couldn't be happier.
Oh, well, thank you.
I want to send you a copy of my book. If you put your in the chat before we sign off, I'll send you a copy.
Okay, yeah, I actually ordered a copy off Amazon,
Oh,
so
okay.
I'm
Oh,
hoping to
all
get
right.
it, the one with the word heart in it. Uh,
A
in the
Global
time.
Heart
Yeah,
Awakens.
yeah, that I should get it either tomorrow or the next day. So
Oh,
I wanted
great.
to beef up your sales. Not that you need it, but I
Oh,
mean,
well, I'm
Yeah.
not worried about that. Yeah.
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 Yeah. Well, thank you, Stephen.
Or
Yeah, totally, totally an honor, a pleasure, a blessing to spend this time with you. Just hear you speak it so clearly and plainly, and
yeah,
yeah, and
thank you.
I'm sure people will get a lot out of this.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I have a second
Lisa
favorite
says,
quote.
beautiful, thank you. I really needed this today.
Good,
So we get some good chat. So,
yeah.
great, great.
Okay.
all right.
All right. So yeah, I guess we'll say thank you as we have, and
Thank you very much.
Blessings.
hope our paths cross again.
I think they will actually.
Yeah, good. Yeah.
Just a guess.
Yeah, well, we have our mutual friend
Yep.
Eileen to thank, and
Right.
yeah,
Yes, yes, Eileen Dunay.
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. All
Okay.
right.
Yeah. She was my agent. Yeah. All right.
Yes.
Well, thank
Okay.
you. And thank you all
Yeah, thank
for
you,
listening.
everyone.
Email about our next interview.
Yeah,
And this is Voices for the Future.
yeah,
And the future is love. And the present is love. And the past is love. That's all there is.
yeah. I mean,
All right.
okay. Beautiful. Thank
Okay.
you.
Take
Thank you.
care.
Bye.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.